My father called me unstable on Live TV when I refused to join his corrupt campaign. That night, I leaked his offshore accounts, exposed his fake eco-resort, and claimed the island my grandfather built with his hands. Hey Reddit, my family treated me like the spare part in their perfect machine. I walked away, built something real, and thought that was the end of it. Turns out the past doesn't stay buried when money and ego are involved. So yeah, let me start from the beginning. The Texas heat never bothered me. It kept the lazy ones indoors and the noise down. I just finished a concrete pour when my phone buzzed in the glove box. Unknown number. A woman's voice came through, clipped and cautious. Your mother's not well. Come home. Then silence. No details, no emotion. Just a demand wrapped in guilt. I stared at the highway for a long minute. 3 years without a call from them, and this was how they reached out. I almost deleted it. Then another buzz. Reed, a dockhand buddy. Heard your old man's turning Eos Island into his campaign cash cow. Don't go alone. That one made me pause. Reed never exaggerated. If he said it was bad, it was bad. The next morning I packed light. Tool bag, spare boots, one duffel. The truck engine growled awake, steady and reliable, the way I liked things. I'm Chase Hale, 33, civil engineer now, Army engineer before that. I build things that stay up and avoid people who fall apart. I drove east before sunrise, past empty diners and half-lit gas stations, until the air thickened with salt and humidity. Shrimp shacks lined the Carolina highway, paint peeling, smoke drifting. Crossing the causeway to Beaufort, South Carolina, felt like driving into a memory I didn't ask for. The sea was flat gray, gulls circling over half-sunk docks. At the end of the bridge, campaign posters leaned on every pole. Richard Hale, 2022. Building a greener future. My father's smile was still politician perfect, even when printed on soggy cardboard. Eos Island came into view beyond the inlet. Grandpa's old property, once a quiet retreat, now a construction zone. Half-finished steel frames jutted out of the sand like broken ribs. Generators thumped in the distance. A crane idled beside stacks of plywood and paint buckets. The air smelled like wet concrete and deceit. I parked by the dock, boots sinking into the mud. Reed was supposed to meet me later, but this was my mess first. A white SUV pulled up before I could knock on the house door. Out stepped Clara, my sister, dressed like she'd come straight from a photo shoot. Designer sandals, wide sunglasses, phone in hand. She gave me a once-over and smirked. You still doing manual labor cosplay, Chase? I wiped my hands on my jeans. You still allergic to honest work? Her smile tightened. Same old Clara, camera ready and dead behind the eyes. Before she could answer, another car rolled in. Black Lincoln, state plates. Out stepped Richard Hale, governor of South Carolina, my father. The man knew how to make an entrance. He walked toward me fast, one hand already extended for the cameras I hadn't seen, but knew were close. His grip was firm, but his eyes were ice. Son, he said loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Good to have you back. We could use your expertise. Sure, I said. Just tell me where to start lying. His smile didn't move. I could practically hear the press flash in his head. He pulled me into a hug for show. It felt like shaking hands with a snake. The house looked wrong. Grandpa's porch, once cluttered with fishing nets and wood shavings, was now polished and bare, like a set waiting for actors. The banners hanging from the balcony flapped in the wind. Richard Hale, 2022. Building a greener future. Inside, the air conditioner hummed too loud. My mother, Eleanor, sat in a wicker chair near the window, wrapped in a blanket though it was 80 degrees. Her face had thinned, but her eyes were sharp. Chase, she whispered, smiling weakly. You came? Yeah, I said, kneeling beside her. Guess someone had to. She looked toward the construction outside, the endless noise. Your grandfather would have hated what they've done. So do I. Her hand trembled when she squeezed mine. Be careful, she said softly. They don't see lines anymore. Just power. I nodded. No promises. That evening, I walked the property alone. The sun dropped behind the marsh, painting the scaffolds in rust-colored light. The old dock where Grandpa taught me to tie knots was gone, replaced by a barge loaded with prefab beams. The island didn't sound like waves anymore. It sounded like machines. Generators buzzed near the main house. Campaign staff laughed over dinner in the outdoor tents, voices blending with the hum of politics and greed. From the second floor, Clara's voice carried, rehearsing a speech about eco-restoration. I almost laughed. I stood at the edge of the construction zone, boots in the sand, the Atlantic stretching black beyond the floodlights. Reed had been right. This wasn't a family project. It was a photo op built on a grave. My mother's warning echoed in my head. They don't see lines anymore. Neither did I. Not tonight. I took a slow breath, watching the campaign banners snap in the wind. This wasn't a homecoming. It was reconnaissance. Dinner smelled like money and ego. The big house table was dressed for show. White linen, oysters on ice, and a bottle of wine older than I was. Press cameras had been cleared from the porch. The house photographer lingered, but the performance never stopped. Dad sat at the head, voice carrying like he was still on stage. "Eos Haven," he said, beaming at the house photographer, "will honor your grandfather's legacy. A resort that gives back to nature. Sustainable, profitable, visionary." Across from him, Clara smiled for her phone, screen glowing as she filmed the spread. "Behind the scenes of rebuilding history," she whispered to her followers. I didn't bother hiding my boredom. I was halfway through my beer when she finally looked up. "You could at least act like you care, Chase." "I do." "About facts." I leaned back, watching Dad swirl his wine. "So what's the wastewater plan?" "That marsh can't handle runoff, and you're dumping concrete 40 yards from the tide line." The table went quiet. Ethan, Clara's fiancé, took his cue to speak. He had the kind of grin you see on billboards, all charm, no spine. "That's your lane, right? Make it look green. Add a solar panel and call it a day." I smiled. "Sure, maybe paint the ocean while I'm at it." Clara exhaled through her nose. "Still jealous you missed the big picture." "Yeah," I said, pushing my plate away. "I prefer real pictures, not filtered ones." Dad sighed, the sound rehearsed. "Son, we're building opportunity here. Jobs, tourism. Your grandfather would have been proud." I stood. "He'd have called it what it is, a scam with marketing." Clara rolled her eyes. Ethan chuckled, and Dad muttered something about me being dramatic. Same script, different year. I walked out before dessert hit the table. The night air hit like salt water, sharp and clean. I crossed the property to the old lighthouse, half swallowed by scaffolding and neglect. Inside, the concrete floor was slick with moss. My flashlight beam cut through dust motes and broken tools. The smell brought me back fast. Oil, wood, sea. Grandpa used to bring me here when I was a kid, teaching me how to measure load and draw angles. "If you get the foundation wrong, everything else lies," he'd said. Near the back wall, a section of shelving leaned crooked, rusted through. I tugged it aside and heard something roll. A metal tube, capped tight with wax. I cracked the seal and slid out a roll of blue paper stiff from years of salt air. Grandpa's handwriting crawled across the edges. Notes, corrections, calculations that still made sense. On the bottom corner, one line underlined twice. "Build clean or don't build at all." I stood there for a while reading. This wasn't a resort plan. It was a design for a self-sustaining home. One house powered by tidal flow and geothermal vents. Simple, elegant, pure. He'd drawn something that could last a century. They'd turned it into a vanity project. Outside, the wind picked up. I looked across the water at the lights of Beaufort glimmering like a lie you tell yourself enough times. The Hales had always talked about legacy. Now their legacy was debt, corruption, and press releases. I tucked the tube under my arm and headed back toward the workshop. The hum of generators filled the air, along with the low chatter of campaign aides drinking by the fire pit. Clara's laugh cut through it. Loud, artificial, practiced. Reed's message burned in my mind. Don't go alone. Too late for that. I slipped the blueprint tube into my truck, slid behind the wheel, and watched the porch lights of the big house. Through the window, I could see Dad rehearsing his speech, Clara posing for photos, Ethan scrolling his phone. Different tools, same purpose. Each of them building a brand, not a life. I muttered, "They want optics?" The engine turned over smooth beneath my hand. "I'll give them exposure." The tide was coming in fast, waves slapping against the pylons. I watched the water rise and smiled. Foundations first. The island's old workshop sat at the far edge of the property, half swallowed by vines and sea mist. Most people saw a ruin. I saw quiet. I swept out the sand, fixed the warped door, and rewired the old lamps until the place hummed again. The smell of sawdust, salt, and diesel filled the air. Peace in chemical form. My tools were laid out. My space reclaimed. It was the first honest square foot of EOS that still felt like Grandpa. 2 mornings in, I heard soft footsteps outside the door. It opened just enough for a small hand to slip through, holding a dented thermos. "Didn't think you'd drink that sludge they serve up at the house?" Mom said, stepping in, her voice low. She looked thinner under the morning light, but her eyes hadn't lost their steel. I took the coffee and nodded. "Thanks. You shouldn't be out here." She smiled faintly. You think I care what your father thinks anymore? Then her tone shifted, quieter. He listens to Clara now. She says you're unstable. I smirked. Only around idiots. That got half a laugh before she sighed, staring at the half-fixed workbench. Your grandfather loved this place. He said it was the only spot on the island that wasn't built for show. Yeah, I said, sanding a board edge. Guess that's why they ignore it. When she left, the silence settled back, heavy but honest. I went through the file cabinets next. Rusted drawers, paper eaten by damp. Most were blank receipts and old project notes. Then I found one folder marked research allocations in my father's handwriting. Inside, invoices and payment records from the Governor's Development Fund, each labeled EOS Environmental Grant. Supposedly, they were for research contracts, companies hired to conduct coastal impact studies, wastewater analysis, eco-material testing. I'd seen real paperwork like this before. This wasn't it. The totals were massive, hundreds of thousands, yet the company names were ghosts. Mariner Analytics, Coastal Dynamics, Blue Horizon Systems. I checked the listed addresses, all P.O. boxes. Some didn't even exist anymore. That's when it clicked. This wasn't project funding. It was laundering. State grant money, routed through fake environmental firms, then funneled right back into Dad's campaign and Clara's so-called PR foundation. A full-scale fraud operation dressed up as eco-research. I leaned back against the cabinet, letting it sink in. They weren't just defiling Grandpa's island. They were using his name as the receipt. That night, I drove into Beaufort. The law office of Randall and Finch still smelled like mildew and old paper. Randall himself, gray and cautious, remembered me. You're Michael Hale's grandson, he said, pushing up his glasses. Did some fine work on this island once. What brings you here? I slid a copy of the old deeds across his desk. I need to know who owns EOS. Legally. He scanned it, frowning. Well, technically, you do. I leaned forward. Come again? Your grandfather filed a transfer of title in your name back in 2015, but it never hit the county system. Someone withdrew it before certification. I didn't need to ask who. Randall tapped the paper. It's still valid on his signature, but you'll need to record it properly. Once it's filed, the island's yours. On paper and off. Driving back, I felt the old soldier reflex settle in. Objective, plan, execute. The property wasn't theirs to sell, and soon the whole crooked operation would sink under its own lies. By the time I reached the house, the family show was cracking. Clara's car was parked sideways in the driveway, music blasting. Inside, she was mid-meltdown, screaming at a staffer about hashtags, her phone live-streaming the chaos. You people are incompetent, she shouted, slamming a glass onto the counter. The camera caught it all. I saw the Xanax bottle half hidden in her purse. When she noticed me, her smile reappeared like a switch. Chase, she said sweetly, you still playing handyman? Yeah, I said. Somebody's got to fix the leaks around here. Ethan showed up that evening with two guys built like door frames. His suit didn't fit the humidity or the company. Nice setup you got here, he said, stepping into the workshop uninvited. His tone was light, but his eyes weren't. Figured I'd stop by and help you see reason. I didn't look up from tightening a bolt. Reason's free. Advice costs extra. He smirked. Look, man, you've had your nostalgia trip. But this island? It's business now. Governor's orders. You digging through old junk makes the investors nervous. Guess they scare easy. Guess they don't like unstable family hanging around construction sites, he said, smiling like he'd just tossed a grenade. I set the wrench down slowly. You send your PR team for this speech? Or just the backup dancers? That cracked his smile. One of the goons stepped forward. Big guy, shaved head, fake cop posture. Boss said you're done here. Pack your tools and leave before someone gets hurt. I met his stare. If you're here to threaten me, start talking. Otherwise, you're trespassing. Ethan's smirk wavered. No one's threatening you, Chase. Just making sure you don't make a bigger mistake than you already have. The guy grabbed my shoulder. That was his mistake. I stepped in, pivoted, and drove my elbow into his jaw. The sound was clean and final. He hit the floor hard, out cold before he knew he was in a fight. The second man froze, halfway between fight and flight. Ethan went pale. Hey, easy, man. There's no need for... I cut him off. Then get your trash off my floor. He dragged his guy upright, muttering something about lawyers and consequences. I followed them to the door. Ethan, I said, steady and loud, I charge extra for stupidity. They didn't look back. That night, Reed came over with a six-pack, his boots muddy from the docks. He took one look at the scuff marks near the doorway and whistled. You ever try subtlety? I cracked open a beer. I did. Didn't stick. He laughed, clinking bottles. So what now, soldier boy? Now? I said, nodding toward the rolled-up blueprints on my workbench. Now we stop pretending they're untouchable. The workshop lights glowed against the storm clouds moving in. I watched the tide rise again and smiled. Eos Island was waking up, and this time, it wasn't theirs to control. The air on Eos Island was heavy with heat and hypocrisy. Bulldozers lined the edge of the marsh, their engines idling like growling dogs. Reporters crowded behind orange tape, makeup melting under umbrellas. Banners flapped over the chaos. Dad stood on a makeshift stage, sleeves rolled, chin high, speaking in that polished, practiced tone that made people forget he was lying. Cameras rolled. Clara stood beside him, all white dress and crocodile tears. The grieving but hopeful daughter. Today, Dad said, his voice booming through the mic, we begin rebuilding what my father started, a symbol of progress and sustainability for future generations. Clara dabbed at her eyes. He'd be so proud, she said softly for the cameras, her voice cracking on cue. They were burying Grandpa's legacy under PR slogans and stolen grant money. I'd had enough. I walked out mid-speech, across the soft sand, ignoring the reporters' confused murmurs. Chase? Clara's voice tightened. What are you doing? I didn't answer. I walked straight to the lead bulldozer, climbed up and yanked the ignition key free. The engine coughed once and died. Reporters started snapping photos. The sudden silence was louder than any speech. Safety violation, I said flatly, tossing the key in my palm. This machine's leaking diesel. You're about to poison half the marsh. Dad froze, smile twitching. The cameras turned to him. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed sweet. My son's been under a lot of stress lately, he said into the mic. He's not well. I turned toward the press. I'm fine. You're the ones operating heavy machinery without permits. That hit him. A murmur rippled through the reporters. Clara stepped forward, heels sinking in the sand. Voice sharp. Chase, stop this! You're ruining our image! I smiled. Pretty sure you did that yourself. The flashbulbs went wild. Security started to move, but none of them knew whose side they were supposed to be on. I held the key up so every camera could see it, then handed it to the site safety inspector at the tape. Document that sheen before it hits the water. Dad's mask cracked. You think you're exposing something? He hissed, voice low enough for only me. All you're doing is humiliating your family. I leaned in just enough for the cameras to catch it. You did that the day you sold them. Then I turned away. The shouting behind me blurred with the whir of camera shutters. That's when I heard a thud, a body hitting wood. Mom. She'd been standing near the stage, pale and quiet. Now she was on the ground, motionless. For a second, everything stopped. Security, cameras, even Dad. Then people rushed forward, voices overlapping. Call an ambulance! Get the medics! I was already there, kneeling beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, weak but focused. Chase, she whispered. It's okay. It's not, I said. Not anymore. Paramedics arrived, lifting her onto a stretcher. Clara was crying for the cameras again, though her tears looked suspiciously dry. Dad barked orders about controlling the narrative. I followed the ambulance to the hospital in silence. By sunset, the clip was everywhere. Governor's son shuts down father's project. Every channel, every feed. The comment section was a war zone. Some called me a hero. Others called me unstable. Just like Clara said I would be. Didn't matter. The truth was finally bleeding through the paint. At the hospital, the lights buzzed low and sterile. Mom lay hooked to an IV, her breathing steady. She looked up when I walked in, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You always were your grandfather's boy, she whispered. I sat beside her. He taught me not to bow to liars. Her hand trembled as she reached into the nightstand and pulled out a small brown envelope, worn from handling. She pressed it into my palm. He left this for you, she said, her voice thin. Protect what's his. I opened it. Inside was an old deed. Michael Hale to Chase Hale, Eos Island. Signed, witnessed, and dated years before Dad's campaign ever began. Behind it, a note in Grandpa's familiar scrawl. It's yours, Chase. Keep it honest. I swallowed hard. The words hit like a command, not a request. Mom's eyes closed, her hand still wrapped around mine. He believed in you, she murmured. Don't let them bury what's left. I won't, I said quietly. It's time they remembered whose ground they're standing on. I kissed her forehead and stood. Outside the window, the glow of the town's skyline reflected off the water, flickering lights built on lies. I slid the deed back into the envelope and tucked it inside my jacket. Time for eviction, I said to the glass. Tomorrow, the Hales would learn what happens when you build your empire on stolen land. The morning after the hospital, I was on the road before sunrise. I drove to the Beaufort County Register of Deeds and recorded my grandfather's transfer. By the time I got back to the island, the stamp on the paperwork had done what speeches never could. I was back in the workshop before the generator warmed up. Reed showed up carrying his old laptop and a six-pack. "You look like you're planning a felony," he said. "Correction," I told him. "I'm planning exposure." He grinned, kicked a stool over, and started setting up. The laptop wheezed to life, screen cracked, fan whining. I hooked up a burner hotspot and loaded the folder labeled EOS Fraud Package. We went through every document twice. Fake environmental grants, shell company invoices, fake signatures. Each one linked the governor's campaign to the stolen state funds. I compressed the files, encrypted them, and dropped them into an anonymous cloud drive. "Who's the lucky recipient?" Reed asked. "Someone who hates hypocrisy more than I do." I opened Reddit, logged into a ghost account, and sent a link to an investigative journalist known for torching corporate fraud. One message, no signature. Then I sat back. Now we wait. It didn't take long. By the next morning, #EOSgate was trending on Twitter, TikTok, and every local feed from Raleigh to Charleston. The documents hit the press like a storm surge. Every screenshot, every transaction, every signature tied to my father's campaign spread across the internet faster than his PR team could delete them. Ethan vanished before noon. His phone went dead, his company site offline. Reporters called him a missing developer tied to the EOS scandal. No one bothered pretending he was innocent. Clara, on the other hand, lost her mind in public. Her Instagram lit up with manic stories. Her crying in one post, shouting in the next, claiming deep state trolls had hacked the project. She blamed me indirectly, but her tone made it obvious. "People don't understand the vision," she sobbed to the camera, mascara streaking. "We were saving the coast." Reed texted me a screenshot with the caption, "Influencer Meltdown Speedrun." Meanwhile, Dad went into damage control. He sat under studio lights for a local news interview, jaw tight, sweat glistening above his collar. The teleprompter words didn't match the panic in his eyes. "These allegations," he said stiffly, "are politically motivated. We remain committed to transparency and progress." The clip went viral for all the wrong reasons. The comment sections tore him apart. By sunset, EOS Island was quiet again. Reporters setting up across the causeway, cops circling the perimeter, campaign staff scattering like gulls before a storm. I sat on the pier with a beer, boots hanging over the water, watching the sky turn red. Reed stood beside me, scrolling through his phone. They're calling it the biggest state-level embezzlement case in 10 years. I took a sip and nodded, foundations cracking. He glanced at me sideways. "You think he'll come clean?" I shook my head. "He'll come angry." The words barely left my mouth before headlights cut across the water. A black SUV tore down the dirt road, kicking up sand. I didn't need to guess who it was. Richard Hale climbed out before the engine stopped. No cameras, no entourage, just rage. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled, his eyes bloodshot. He stormed down the dock toward me. "You destroyed us." I stood, beer in hand, calm as the tide. "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending." He jabbed a finger into my chest. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You ruined your mother's peace. You humiliated this family. This family humiliated itself." His jaw twitched. He swung wild and sloppy. I ducked, caught his arm, and shoved him hard against a piling. The wood groaned. "You built your name on my silence," I said, voice low and steady. "Consider it revoked." He glared at me, breathing heavy, pride collapsing in real time. The old Governor Act was gone, just a man stripped of his stage lights. Then I noticed the flashes. Across the water, on the mainland side, cameras, reporters. Someone had followed him here. "Smile, Dad," I said. "You're live again." He turned, blinded by the flashes, and staggered away down the dock. His shoes splashed through the shallows as the shouting from the reporters reached us. Reed whistled low. Guess that's one way to end a campaign. I cracked open another beer and watched the lights of the mainland pulse like a slow heartbeat. "Funny thing about foundations," I said. "Once they crack, the whole house comes down." He laughed quietly. "So what now?" "Now," I said, watching the governor of South Carolina disappear into the headlines he'd written for himself. "We start rebuilding. Clean this time." The tide rolled in beneath us, washing away the footprints on the sand. The island was finally quiet. Before dawn the next morning, the storm came hard and early, sliding in from the Atlantic. By dusk, the wind was screaming through the half-finished resort. turning banners into whips and scaffolding into shrapnel. The air was thick with salt and pressure, the kind that made your ribs vibrate. The first wave hit the shoreline like a fist, then another, and another. Within an hour, the Eos Haven Eco Resort was nothing but a pile of steel bones and false promises. The luxury cabins Ethan designed were ripped from their foundations and carried straight into the marsh. The main pavilion, the one Dad called a symbol of sustainable progress, snapped in half, a jagged tooth against the horizon. I stood at the edge of the workshop, rain hammering down, watching nature do what it does best, clean up after human arrogance. By morning, the drone footage was everywhere. Clips of cranes sinking into the surf, a construction trailer tumbling like a soda can, and my father's smiling campaign banners floating out to sea. News anchors didn't even bother softening it. "Nature's verdict," one headline read. Another, "The green project that drowned itself." The internet called it poetic justice. I called it overdue. 2 days later, 48 hours after the leak, the Hale family brand collapsed. Governor Richard Hale resigned in disgrace. No crowd, no cameras, just a press release drafted by a lawyer and read on every evening broadcast. The statement was short. Governor Hale will step down to focus on family matters. Translation: the state had him cornered. The grant records I'd leaked weren't just headlines anymore. They were evidence. There were investigations, subpoenas, and a sudden parade of no comments. His inner circle scattered like birds off a wire. Clara didn't fare much better. Her meltdown went viral. Someone spliced her hysterical live streams into a highlight reel called Eco Princess Meltdown, Extended Cut. Within hours, it was trending. Her sponsors pulled out, her management dropped her, and Twitter renamed her Clara Crisis. She tried to pivot, posted a tearful apology video about being manipulated by toxic men. But by then, nobody cared. Ethan vanished for a few days before the feds found him in the Bahamas under a fake name, surrounded by receipts, empty rum bottles, and a broken laptop. The footage of his arrest played on loop, sunburned, sweating, handcuffed in flip-flops. He'd become the punchline to the story he helped create. I watched it all unfold from Eos Island. The workshop stood untouched, the only solid thing left on the property. Everything else, Dad's career, Clara's image, Ethan's empire, was just debris floating in the tide. Later that week, there was Mom. Eleanor Hale never liked hospitals, but she looked peaceful there, surrounded by white walls and the sound of the sea through the window. When I walked in, she managed a faint smile. "It's over," I said quietly, pulling a chair beside her bed. Her eyes stayed half open. "Good," she whispered. "It needed to end." We sat there in silence. The heart monitor beeped slow and steady, each sound smaller than the one before it. "You were right," I muttered. "Some things aren't worth fixing." Her hand squeezed mine weakly. "Some things just need to fall apart." I stayed with her until the monitor faded to a flat tone. The nurse came in, eyes soft, and I stepped back. The room felt too clean for grief. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like the storm. When I got back to Eos, the damage was total. The house was gutted, half the shoreline eroded. Campaign signs littered the sand like headstones. My father's dream was a carcass, picked clean by the tide. For the first time, I didn't feel rage, just exhaustion. The kind that settles deep and stays. Reed called that night from the mainland. "You okay, man?" "Yeah," I said, watching the lightning fade over the water. "Just cleaning up the remains." He hesitated. "You won, Chase. You brought them down." "Maybe," I said. "Doesn't feel like it." He was quiet for a while. "So what now?" "I don't know. Maybe something worth keeping." After we hung up, I walked back to the workshop. The generator hummed softly, the only sound left on the island. I opened Grandpa's old sketchbook, the one with the salt-stained pages and fading blue ink. It hit different now. He hadn't been talking about construction. He'd been talking about life. Maybe peace doesn't arrive like a storm. Maybe it builds slower. At sunrise, I got to work. I dragged what was left of the steel beams out of the wreckage, sorted what could be saved, and started rebuilding. No fresh drawings, just the lighthouse plans and muscle memory. Every swing of the hammer echoed through the empty property. No campaign speeches, no investors, just the sound of metal meeting purpose. By the second day, I had the new foundation framed. By the third, I raised the first beam. It wasn't much, just a skeleton against the skyline, but it was honest. I kept working. Nails, bolts, measurements. I rebuilt the pier where Grandpa used to fish, reinforced the dock, cleared the deadwood from the marsh. My hands blistered, my back ached, and for the first time in years, I didn't mind. Every strike, every cut, every ounce of effort felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen. Not the land, but the meaning of it. At dusk, I stood beneath the half-finished frame, watching the ocean stretch out flat and calm. The air was warm again, clean and steady. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. I looked down at the blueprints on the table. Grandpa's sketches were faded, but his message was still clear. You can't build anything lasting on lies. I closed the notebook, wiped the sawdust off my hands, and looked out across the shoreline where the resort once stood. No cameras, no audience. Just me, the wind, and the echo of something real. Eos Island wasn't a project anymore, it was a promise. And for the first time since I was a kid, I wasn't fixing someone else's mess. I was building my own foundation. The tide crept in slow and quiet, brushing against the new beams. I stood there until the sun went down, feeling the weight of the storm finally lift. This time, when the silence came, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like peace. 6 months later, the island didn't smell like politics anymore. It smelled like salt, cedar, and fresh paint. Gulls coasted low over the water, riding the wind in lazy arcs. The new house stood clean and solid on the hill, my grandfather's exact design, rebuilt from his original plans. The solar panels along the roof hummed quietly, feeding power into the batteries I'd installed by hand. The house wasn't big, but it was honest. Every board, every beam, every nail meant something. I'd rebuilt it with the same precision I'd used in the army. No speeches, no shortcuts, just good work done right. The dock was new too, reinforced and balanced, strong enough to handle storms. The wreckage was gone, replaced by open sky and quiet water. Eos Island looked alive again. Not tamed, not claimed, just respected. Reed's old fishing boat chugged up to the pier around noon. He jumped off carrying a crate of canned food and a coil of wire. "Supplies for the hermit," he said, grinning. "You know they're naming this place a heritage site, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "Heritage?" "Yep. State Historical Commission voted yesterday. Eos Island, preserved site of coastal restoration and legacy. You're officially living in a monument." "Good," I said, taking the crate from him. "Keeps the clowns off my lawn." Reed laughed. "You'd hate it if it got quiet." "It's already quiet. I like it that way." He looked around, nodding. "Place looks solid, man. Feels right." "It is." He didn't stay long. Had a night shift at the docks. But as he left, he turned back and said, "Funny thing, Chase. You spent years fixing other people's messes. Guess it took tearing everything down to build something that's actually yours." Guess so. When his boat disappeared beyond the inlet, the silence returned. Steady and familiar. The kind of quiet that doesn't demand anything from you. I was tightening a section of the deck railing when I heard tires on gravel. A silver sedan crawled up the dirt path. I recognized it before the door opened. Clara stepped out, sunglasses on despite the cloudy sky. She looked thinner, jumpier. Too much caffeine, not enough sleep. Her once polished voice had a tremor now. "Nice place," she said, glancing around. "Looks normal. That's the point." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You won, Chase. You happy now?" I leaned against the post. "Wasn't a contest." Her jaw tightened. "Could have fooled me. You just kept losing." That stopped her. For a second, her face flickered between anger and shame. Then she looked down, kicked at the gravel, and got back in her car. She didn't say another word before driving off. The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm ever had. I didn't hate her. I didn't pity her either. She'd made her choices, same as the rest of them. Some foundations were never meant to hold. By nightfall, the sky cleared. The ocean reflected streaks of silver light from the solar rig. I sat on the porch, boots up on the railing, a cold beer sweating in my hand. The only sound was the steady thrum of the inverter and the rhythm of the tide. Through the open window, the TV murmured. Local news, low volume. Former Governor Richard Hale has been indicted on charges of fraud, money laundering, and misuse of state funds, the anchor said. His daughter, Clara Hale, has filed for bankruptcy following the collapse of her media company. The Hale family, once a political dynasty, is now facing... I turned up the volume just enough to catch the end. Possible federal charges pending. I took a sip of beer, smiling faintly. Gravity still works. I shut the TV off and grabbed the file folder sitting on the porch table. The logo on the first page read, EOS Engineering, LLC. The ink was barely dry. The company was small. Just me, Reed, and 3 veterans I'd met through a local housing nonprofit. The goal was simple. Build sustainable, storm-resilient homes for people who couldn't afford the overpriced garbage developers were pushing. No politics. No slogans. Just solid work. I'd already filed the paperwork, set up the bank account, and bought the first batch of tools. It wasn't about profit, it was about purpose. As I flipped through the papers, I thought about Grandpa, his hands rough from work, his quiet laugh, his faith that good craftsmanship meant something. I remembered him saying once, "Houses don't just shelter people, they outlive them if you build them right." He was right. I walked to the edge of the porch, the boards creaking under my boots. The tide was high, brushing against the new pilings. The air tasted like salt and wood dust. Eos Island didn't belong to the Hales anymore. It didn't belong to anyone but the truth. The moon rose over the water, pale and clean. The wind shifted, carrying the faint hum of the solar panels across the property, a quiet heartbeat of the house itself. I sat back down, finished my beer, and looked at what I'd built. No banners, no fake speeches, no ghosts. Just a house that would stand through any storm. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to break. I felt steady, rooted. I picked up my pen, signed the final page of the business papers, and slid them into the envelope. EOS Engineering was official. The first project, rebuilding homes for 3 veterans down in Charleston whose houses had been wiped out by the same storm that destroyed this island's lie. I smiled. Full circle. The generator clicked off as the solar batteries took over. The house hummed quietly, the kind of sound that told you everything was working the way it should. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the stars that had started to break through the cloud cover. Peace wasn't a prize. It wasn't something you stumbled into. It was something you made. One nail, one plan, one choice at a time. I raised my bottle toward the empty sky and spoke softly, the words meant for the man who taught me everything that mattered. Peace isn't something you find, I said. It's something you build, one honest beam at a time. The wind carried the words out over the water, and for the first time in years, I felt them settle inside me. Solid, permanent, true. I never did learn who made that first call. Maybe that's fitting. Warnings don't change storms, foundations do. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.